You know what? Forget it. It works. In the last video, we looked at how React create context is used. In the video before that, I had 2 code snippets on a page, and when you would press run on one of those code snippets, both would update the output with the exact same thing. Obviously, that's a little confusing and we don't want that. So in this video, we're gonna look at how we solve this problem. We're gonna do an experiment in this video. Instead of looking at what I did, I'm gonna focus on why I did things and a little bit on how, but not what exactly. So just to show you that I'm not a liar, this is it working properly, and we'll go look at exactly why that is. The main issue was I was intercepting the browser's window console. When I was running things on either code editor, the window wouldn't know which log statement came from which editor. So the first thing that came to mind is, well, what about workers? Workers have something called a worker global scope that is completely separate from the window. There's actually not a lot of overlap between the window scope and a worker scope. And this is actually for a good reason. It's mainly for security, but also so that we can ensure that these two things can run completely separately. So the way that they communicate with each other is with message passing. So inside of our code, I won't go into it too much, but we can see that I'm posting a message to a worker, and when I receive a message, I'm resolving a promise. Next.js 10 ships with an option to enable Webpack version 5. And Webpack version 5 has a very convenient feature, which is it will support adding workers with this notation. This might look familiar to you, but there's one key difference. This path is relative to the current file, not to the output directory, which is what it was before. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it was before. But now this will actually get built. So you can see that, browsers don't really accept TypeScript, but this will get built into a JavaScript file. So here's the basic idea. We'll have a window, and then we'll spawn a worker. We'll send code to that worker, and then the worker will process the code, intercept any console log statements, and then the worker will send back an array of console statements to the window. Console. And it could be log, could be warn, etc. And in the process of creating this new worker, I rediscovered what a JavaScript proxy is. In the middle of working on it, I was thinking, I wonder if there's a better way that we could be intercepting console log. Something about it felt a little bit messy to me. And I remembered that there was this thing in JavaScript called a proxy. A proxy allows you to intercept and redefine fundamental operations for that object. And that is exactly what I want to do when I'm trying to intercept and redefine a console. So the idea behind a proxy is very similar to a web proxy. You have a box. In that box, you can put in the thing that you're intercepting. And then whenever a request comes in, it then can read that request and decide what to do with it. And if you wanted to do nothing, you can just forward it back to this object, this target, and then it can respond with the appropriate response. You can even actually intercept this response and then send a different response if you really wanted to, like if you're doing some sort of sanitization. Now, in our case, let's say we're doing console log. We're going to do exactly what we were doing before, but this time with a proxy. We reassign console log to our new proxy, and inside of our proxy, we have the original console log. When we apply or call console log, it's going to call the handler called apply. So apply gets called, it processes it, and then sends it to console log. And in this case, we don't get an output because console log doesn't have an output. It has something that outputs to the browser's console, but we already have discovered that we can't touch that. But what we can do is take the arguments of that function and then pass it on to some sort of array. But I took it a step further. Not only did I intercept console log, but I also intercepted every method of console. So I reassigned the worker console to my proxy console, and I have a handler called get. So remember I was talking about apply. There's also another one for when you're not trying to call a function, when you're just looking at getting the property of that object. And that's what this get does. So I have a target, which will be the console, and then the prop will be one of the console keys. So log, warn, dir, derp. No, just kidding, that's not one, but you get the point. And then I make a proxy inside of that proxy with that target. So this, for example, if the prop was log, this would be console log right here, but not the intercepted console log. this would be the original console log. But we are proxying that original console log. And of course, we're calling that function. So we have this apply. So I have this create apply. And in create apply, what I do is I pass the prop or the level, like log, warn, etc., into here, and then return a function that will then get the target and then get this arg. Oh my goodness, this is a ridiculous amount of coding explanation. You know what? Forget it. It works. If you want to look at the code, you can go and look at my GitHub repository and just browse it as much as you please. It's completely public. If you really want to have an explanation for all this stuff, let me know and maybe I will consider making one. But it's a little bit, I don't know, I don't think this is interesting at all. But okay, so we run our function. This console is overridden. So anytime this function calls console, we're going to get it. Oh, and one big thing that I forgot to mention. What I do is when I get those arguments, I push them to an array called messages. And then I send those messages back to our original window. And then I clear the messages after that's all done. And then back in our code.tsx file, all we have to do is instead of evaluating the code here, we're actually just sending a message and then we wait the promise that comes back. And then if we have a result, then we set the result. If we have an error, we set the error. And that's it. It's just so simple, so easy. Oh my God. Just kidding. You saw how I used a worker in order to separate the scope of the window and the worker so that it could take advantage of the fact that it has a separate console. And therefore any console log statements would happen inside the worker and not inside the window. And I could then send code to the worker, get the response, and then put the response into my code editor. That's it. This video was a little bit lighter on the code side of it. And that's because I don't think the code is necessarily that interesting. Going line by line can be fun sometimes, but generally not. It's much more interesting to go into why I did things the way that I did them. And then maybe it might help you when you're working on your own projects that you can say, oh yeah, you did something a certain way. Maybe I should try it. Or maybe I should try a different way. Who knows? I'll see you in the next video.